bartering is largely a game of wits, with each side trying to get what they feel is the better deal. One thing a seller is looking for is how excited a buyer is to obtain an item, because this gives away how badly they want it and puts the buyer at a disadvantage, giving the seller most of the leverage. A seasoned picker like Mike or Frank knows this, and as such, they need to refrain from showing any outward excitement about an item they encounter. Their book, American Picker's Guide to Picking, has them explaining how important a poker face is when scavenging for items and how they've dropped the ball by letting too much excitement show after spotting an item they wanted. As a result, these actions made negotiations that much tougher to go in their favor. The nature of rummaging through people's inventory to find the diamonds in the rough is that a lot of what Mike and Frank find aren't in the best condition. Most often, a certain amount of restorative work has to be done on what they found in order to make it resale-worthy. The trick is making sure that anything they buy that is going to need repairs of some kind can be brought up to snuff as cheaply as possible. Mike and Frank need to do quick math and take their best guess as to what a restoration is going to cost on an item, and if that, plus the seller's asking price, exceeds what they'll be able to flip it for, then it's not worth buying it. When most people think of antiques, they think of the kinds of things they see on programs like Antiques Roadshow, fine china, ornate vases, Faberge eggs, classic music boxes, et al. And none of that stuff is what Mike and Frank are interested in buying or selling. American Pickers isn't about antiques in the traditional sense. It is about items that lean more toward mainstream or pop culture interests just from a long time ago and that aren't easy to come by. Besides, things that are usually considered fine antiques probably aren't going to be found lying in someone's backyard among rusted-out cars and the like. If they are, there is no way they'd be salvageable at that point. As has been pointed out in various ways in other items on this list, the golden rule of pickers is to buy low and sell high. That first part is extremely important, as overpaying for an item makes it difficult, sometimes even impossible, to earn a profit on it later. But Mike and Frank are human, and sometimes they let their excitement over an item get the better of them, which leads to bad decisions. One famous example of this is when they jumped at the chance to buy a classic Indian motorcycle and inadvertently ended up overpaying for it before realizing that not only did it need costly repairs, but demand wasn't what they thought it was. None of which would have been as big a deal if they didn't overpay for it in the first place. What makes people come to Mike and Frank and buy their wares is that they are selling things that are unique and not available anywhere else. It's not enough to just have the original version of something, you need to have one of the only versions of it. The average person probably doesn't care if they are buying an original version of something or a mass-produced reproduction of it, which makes it risky to sell things when its cheaper versions exist. For this reason, Mike and Frank avoid items that have mass-market alternatives and try to stick with things that people can only realistically have if they pay for the antique, original version of it. While some things should go without saying, they still need to be pointed out as not everyone is willing to let their common sense precede their actions. Just because Mike and Frank are in the business of rummaging through people's unwanted items doesn't mean that they can help themselves to the property of the deceased, even though nobody is less in need of material possessions than those that have passed on. A lot of less scrupulous amateur pickers take to grave robbing to find potential scores, which, needless to say, is not only immoral, but highly illegal. It is definitely not the nobody-gets-hurt crime that some people think it is, and Mike and Frank have never and would never stoop so low just to try and find a piece to sell. The world wasn't always as progressive as it is now, and a lot of products exist from the old days that are now seen as either insensitive at best and outright offensive at worst. Everything from stereotypical portrayals of minorities to misogynistic ads featuring women can often be found among the items for sale at antique shops. While a lot of people see such items as simply a part of history and don't think there is anything wrong with collecting them, many of them have no place on television. In spite of what Mike and Frank might be willing to sell in their own respective shops, they have to be very careful about what they show and buy on American Pickers, as it's an all-ages show and isn't about pushing boundaries or potent. The truth is that most of the people who sell to Mike and Frank on American Pickers don't know what their stuff is worth, and they rely on Mike and Frank to be honest with them and offer them a fair price. Unfortunately, Mike and Frank don't always seem to be able to resist the urge to be less than forthcoming about the value of people's items and willingly buy them for much lower than they're worth. One of the most common complaints levied against American pickers is that Mike and Frank knowingly mislead the elderly about the value of their items, knowing that older people are especially susceptible to believing what people tell them. A particularly damning quote from the pickers themselves has them saying, "If they are only looking for $100, we don't want to offer them 3."